Welcome to HitPoint. It's the show where we talk about movies, video games, TV shows, and anything else worth talking about. I'm your host, Andrew Jeffries. Very excited to dive into today's topic, which is going to be a discussion of the Disney Star Wars movies. This is largely going to be kind of an expansion of my Star Wars tier ranking video that I did a while back, in which I just ranked everything at an S tier. But I am going to sort of expand my thoughts on kind of all the new movies, starting first with the spinoffs, and then I'll get into the main episodes. But I'm just going to be covering the Disney movies. I'm not going to be talking about the Mandalorian or the new Clone Wars episodes or anything like that. Just going to be sticking with the movies because that's what I have the most thoughts on. Not that I don't enjoy those shows. I do enjoy them quite a bit, but they're just a bit out of the purview of this episode. As always, we're supported on Patreon. Our Patreon supporters are E-Man and Doug Jeffries. Thank you for your support of the channel. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can head on over to patreon.com/hitpoint. And you can always donate $5 a month if you want. Otherwise, you can just hit like and subscribe on our YouTube page or our Facebook page as well. We definitely encourage that. Jeremy and I definitely thank you for that. I'm hoping that we might have a normal Jeremy and Andrew episode soon, but no confirmation on that yet. But hopefully we might be hearing from Jeremy here sometime soon. But with all that being said, let's get into our main topic today, the Disney Star Wars movies. Now, I do want to say, as I get into this topic, that this is a judgment-free zone. You are free to like and dislike any of these movies, the same as I am able to like and dislike any of these movies. If you like a movie I did not like, that is great. That's wonderful. I love that I love when people love Star Wars no matter what it is, even if it's something that I dislike about Star Wars. If somebody else loves it, I'm so happy for them because I love other people getting into the thing that I really enjoy too. Star Wars has been a great source of joy and happiness for me over the years, so anytime somebody else gets to experience that same sort of happiness and joy, that is awesome. So I want to keep this a judgment-free zone. You are free to agree or disagree with any of my choices. I just ask that you would, just sort of respect them. You don't have to agree with them, but just respect that other people might think differently from you. And I will respect any sort of differences of opinions that you might have, as long as we're just kind of cool about stuff. Now, with that being said, let's talk about the spin-off movies. First off, my thoughts on Rogue One. Rogue One, I described as the I think I described it as the prequel movie that nobody asked for, but everybody enjoyed. And yeah, it's a totally unnecessary story. We didn't need to see how the rebels got the plans for the Death Star. But it was still really cool and really fun to get to see that. And in a lot of ways, Rogue One is a movie that I enjoyed kind of in spite of its own flaws. I think it's actually got a really weak script. For at least the first 2/3 of it, I don't think it's all that compelling of a story. I think it has some interesting characters, but Jyn Erso as kind of our main point of view character is kind of a weak character, I guess. She's really passive and just sort of is going along with all of this stuff that is happening. She's not making a lot of dynamic choices herself, or at least she doesn't for the first 2/3. The last third, she does make a lot of the choices for herself and really sort of takes the lead. And I think that's the best part of the movie, and that's definitely the most fun part of the movie. That's when it really kicks into gear. But I think she's just a bit too passive in the first 2/3 to really make her a great character. And I don't know if that's a result of kind of the rewrites and reshoots that Rogue One went through. Reportedly, it did go through a lot of changes after they sort of finished shooting the initial version of the script that was locked down. They went back and refilmed a lot of it, and you can actually see the differences in the first trailers. There's a lot of shots that are not used in the final movie, which is interesting in its own right. but her being a passive protagonist, I've seen some people suggest that maybe that was a purposeful choice to fit the narrative of the story where, she's kind of being forced to do all this stuff. And like, I get where that point of view is coming from. I just don't think that's a compelling argument because purposefully making somebody a passive protagonist doesn't make that choice any better. It just doesn't, that doesn't really fly with me. And I understand, once again, what they're trying to say when people make that argument, but I just don't think it's a good one. But I did really enjoy Rogue One for its look at kind of the morality of the rebellion, where we start to see these sort of splinter groups that are a bit more fanatical and a bit more violent, and just sort of looking at the impact on this, on kind of the state of the people who are actually in the day-to-day operations of the rebellion. Cassian, he's been fighting since, he's been, basically his whole life he's been fighting the Empire, and that's taken a psychological toll on him. And it's cool to see Star Wars sort of exploring that a little bit more. And like I said, I really like the last third of the movie, where it just turns into this all-out war. It's so cool. It's so much fun to just watch this big space battle, just seeing the rebellion really kick things off. And it's just it's a lot of fun. And the last thing I'll say about it is just how great the music is. I was pretty nervous about Rogue One because I knew John Williams was not going to be doing the score for it. And that almost felt a little bit like heresy, but I was still trying to go into it with an open mind. The score was by Michael Giacchino. And normally I'm not a huge fan of his scores. I don't dislike them. He just really scores a little bit too heavily for the moment and the emotion, which is not a bad way to do it. In fact, that's a really great way to score movies. Any good composer will do that with their scores. They'll score for the emotion, for what the story's going for. But I just like a heavy dose of melodies. And Michael Giacchino's newer film scores tend to lack strong melodies, I find, or at least in my opinion. They're not nearly as strong as, say, John Williams, who uses a lot of strong melodies. But he really knocked it out of the park for Rogue One. I really liked his use of melodies. Krennic's theme is one of my favorite villain themes in all of Star Wars. One of my favorite themes, period, in all of Star Wars. But as a villain's theme, it's excellent. It's so good. Like, there's just... It's so easy to remember, and like does get across the initial menacing like tone that Krennic really sets up that is never really paid off in a good way. Krennic sort of burns out as a villain within the first 10 minutes of the movie, which is unfortunate. Which kind of goes back to the story of Rogue One being a little bit weak. The villain kind of gets what they want. The villain, being Krennic, gets what they want within the first couple of minutes, and they're never really given another compelling thing to go after for the rest of the movie. Like, okay, after he gets Galen or so, he then wants to be in control of the Death Star. Well, we as an audience already know what's going to happen to the Death Star, so we know it's kind of a good thing that he's not on the Death Star in a way for Krennic. But he doesn't really have a compelling secondary goal to go for. Like, he just wants to be in control of the Death Star. And when he's not, then he just sort of meanders about and is chasing other goals. He's kind of passive in that way too, almost a reflection of Jyn. And it's not a great set of choices. But I do really like the initial promise of Krennic a lot, and he does have a really great theme. So that's what I'll say about Rogue One. Rogue One is a movie that I enjoyed in spite of its own flaws, but it's still a good Star Wars movie. So let's talk about Solo. And here's where I actually don't have a lot of thoughts about Solo. Solo is kind of the beige of Star Wars movies, where it's just sort of there. It's not doing anything offensive. It's not doing anything really interesting. It's just there having a grand old time. And that's what Solo is. It's a grand old time. It's fun. It's not going to challenge your expectations of the world. It does kind of undercut Han's arc a little bit, since they really lean heavily on kind of the heart of gold scoundrel. Too much. They don't. It's when you meet Han Solo in A New Hope, he's very like almost cold-blooded, very a very hardened character when we meet him. And by the end of the movie, he does reveal kind of his heart of gold, where like even when he does make that, it does seem like he's going to make that selfish choice of just taking the money and running. He still comes back and helps the rebellion. Well, it turns out he basically sort of sets up the rebellion in Solo. And so you don't really get that like actual scoundrel, like, oh, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? There's no kind of gray to his morality. He's always trying to be a good guy in Solo, it's fine. I mean, yeah, it's fine. It's not fantastic. It's not a choice I think is a great one by any means, but it's still a fun movie. I did really enjoy watching it. I enjoyed it a lot more in the theater than I thought I would. Um, I feel bad for Alden Ehrenreich, who played Solo. He got a lot of flack for his portrayal of the character that I don't think he should have gotten. I think a lot of people went into that movie expecting him to do kind of a Harrison Ford impersonation. And Alden Ehrenreich was not interested in doing that. He was allowed to actually play the character of Han Solo. And I think a lot of people sort of miss that Han Solo and Harrison Ford are two different people. Han Solo is a character who has, these series of traits. And Alden Ehrenreich got to embody those traits in a way that was different from Harrison Ford. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. It's good to see characters kind of or to have actors have different takes on these characters that we know. We might get something a little bit unexpected with it. And I think that's good. It's good for filmmakers to take some risks on that. And Solo was not a movie that took a lot of risks. Especially after The Last Jedi. That's not too surprising. But that's really all I have to say about Solo. Not a lot of really deep thoughts on it. It's fine. It's fine. That's really all I can say about Solo is it's fine. I own it. I have the 4K Blu-ray, so I can't say a whole lot about it, but it's fine. It's fun. It's good. It's more Star Wars, so I will not argue against it. All right, now let's talk about the mainline movies. Episodes 7, 8, and 9. These have been the subject of a great amount of internet controversy, though I think a lot of that has kind of been overblown. I think overall the public reception to these movies has been very positive, and that there's just been a very vocal online minority talking about these movies. And in general, I would categorize my response to them as being positive. I've really enjoyed most of the output, and if you've heard a little bit of what I've said on this podcast before, you probably know where I'm going with this. But let's talk about Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Now, a lot of people had a major criticism of Episode 7 in that it was just a rehash of A New Hope in a way that... And they meant that as a bad thing. And I can understand where that's coming from, because if you look at the bones of the story structure in The Force Awakens, it's really easy to say how much that does look like A New Hope. The major beats are kind of the same, and even a lot of the locales, if you will, are visually similar. And so I can understand where that criticism comes from, but I think we have to kind of reframe how we view The Force Awakens, because I think this movie set out with a couple different objectives. That had to set up the new characters, it had to refresh the universe, had to reconnect us with the old characters, and then also move the universe forward. And that's a tall order for any big, long-running series to do. And so I think to sort of mirror the structure of a movie we know and love, like A New Hope, was a really smart move. I get that, it wasn't as daring as everybody wanted it to be, but frankly, it didn't need to be. It needed to reassure people that Star Wars was in good hands, and I think it did that. Because this movie is a lot of fun. It reminds us of what we loved about the old movies, that it's just this grand adventure. We're getting to watch these people work together to defeat this evil force. And it's so much fun to watch these characters interact with each other. They have a wonderful sense of chemistry, and it's just so fun. J.J. Abrams creates this grand visual spectacle throughout the entire movie that is really good. I'm not thrilled by the choice of having Starkiller Base be, just pretty much just a bigger Death Star that can destroy more things at once. Like, I think that's a little bit boring. So yeah, that's a fair criticism. But overall, I think it's still really good. I talked about bones. If the bones are, kind of the same as A New Hope, I think the connective tissue between those bones is different enough and interesting enough that it stands on its own. I really like the new characters. Sort of the stormtrooper kind of turning on the First Order with Finn. That's an interesting new character. And does set up some interesting, and it does set up some interesting questions that are never satisfactorily resolved with the rest of the movies. I know a lot of people sort of expected there to be kind of a stormtrooper rebellion almost at one point by the end of this series that was never really paid off. That it does seem like they were sort of setting that up a little bit. But still, I think it's really quite enjoyable. Rey as a character is a great sort of replacement for Luke for, this new character going on a grand adventure and getting to discover a whole new world that she's never been a part of. A powerful connection for, girls who, wouldn't have connected, say, with another Luke or another male lead. So I think that's a really great female role model that we get to see in the movies, a strong female character getting to make her own choices. And I think that's really wonderful. I loved having Luke as sort of a role model of this guy who always wants to do the right thing and to do good. And now, girls also get to have that too. Someone who's like them. Not that, gender is necessarily the prime division here or anything. Not that like girls can't look up to Luke Skywalker or boys can't look up to Rey, but it does make it easier when, it's someone who's a bit more like you in that way. The Force Awakens, really good movie. Really enjoyed it. A lot of fun. Not a whole lot to dig into from a story perspective because it has to sort of refresh the universe and it does hew a little bit too closely to A New Hope, but it's still a really great time and still a really strong start to the new movies. But let's go to The Last Jedi. And my initial thoughts on The Last Jedi. This movie rules. It's so good. Like, it is incredible as a Star Wars movie. And I did not have those thoughts when I initially left the theater. I was not a huge fan of The Last Jedi leaving. I enjoyed the movie. I liked it, but I actually wasn't sure about what I thought about The Last Jedi leaving the theater. And it took me having to see it a second time to really understand everything that was going on and realizing, wow, this movie had a whole lot to say. And even now when I rewatch it, I'm still picking up on new things, new nuances to the story and performances and characters that says something new about the movie. And it's just such a dense movie that you really have to watch it a lot, unfortunately, not unfortunately, it's a great movie to rewatch and it's a lot of fun. But it is, if you're just basing it off the first time you watch it, you might be a little bit underwhelmed by, it's weird to say, but you might be underwhelmed by how much is going on. It just seems like maybe they're throwing so much stuff at you and it's like, oh, they could have cut a whole lot of this out and it would have been but when you actually watch the movie again and realize the whole story in context, it really like weaves together very beautifully. It's a thoughtful and introspective look at the Star Wars story, kind of via this sort of meta commentary and talking about the prequels. Like, a Star Wars movie actually interacts with the prequels in a thoughtful way and thinks about what the prequels said about the systems that they created, about the Jedi, and about their legacy, and challenges that. Something you would not expect from a Star Wars movie. You would expect just the full out, like, Star Wars, yeah, Star Wars, great. And Star Wars is great. And The Last Jedi ultimately does say Star Wars is great, but it is willing to also challenge that our preconceived thoughts about Star Wars might need to change or be challenged or shift or be willing to do one of those things or all of those things. But I love that it's a celebration ultimately of what Star Wars means to people and what Star Wars can be to everyone. And it's so gripping and so moving and so incredible and just so intricately put together. Um, Man, I just love The Last Jedi. I love that it returns the Force to being sort of this mysterious, mystical power. The Force was initially envisioned as kind of this, like a sort of a like a religious force that is kind of changed into more of a science fiction type force in the prequels. Um, but The Last Jedi comes back to sort of a quiet reverence of the Force in that it's a mysterious power that like connects all things together. And I think that's a really great move to go back in that direction rather than it being an explanation for people's power levels. I love that The Last Jedi gave thoughtful arcs to all of the main characters, and it turns Kylo Ren into the best villain, hands down. He has a compelling reason for believing what he believes. You don't have to agree with it, and you probably shouldn't agree with it, but you can at least understand where he's coming from within the context of his own arc. And it's a really powerful narrative, and it's really cool to see him interact with Rey and the connection that they have within the Force. And it's so awesome. And like the movie just has this really great habit of taking away the thing that characters think that they want in order to force them to recognize what they need. It's really smart about kind of its storytelling structure. Like it takes away Poe's ability to just get an X-Wing and blow things up, which is all he wants to do. But he just wants to be this hero that, probably ideally gets blown up in the middle of battle, just in some sort of glorious fight. But what he needs to recognize is he needs to be a leader. And that means kind of sometimes running away from the fight and not taking the fight head on. And the movie's just full of things like that, of sort of revelations like that, just forcing characters to really think about what they're doing and to recognize the consequences of their actions and making them have consequences to their actions. Is a really bold move when we just want to see our good guys win all the time. Like, we want the facade of challenges being there. But this is a movie that is unafraid to really challenge our protagonists, not just in skill and in belief, but in just fundamental thought. Thought. There's so like there's such dedication given to really challenging what the characters think about something and how they have to approach their life and forcing them to confront that and to maybe change. A really great example of that is making Rey a nobody. Throughout the entire movie, she just wants her connection to this story to be affirmed through some sort of familial connection or through some connection to like a father type figure. But the movie just takes that from her and says, no, you're a nobody. And that is such a great choice because it means she as a character gets to choose her own path and her own destiny. It's not just some sort of, well, I'm the chosen one and I get to do all the things because I'm the chosen one. No, she's great because she's chosen to be great. She's made the choices. She's done the work to do that. It's not just sort of handed to her because, oh, well, she's a Skywalker. That makes her powerful. No, her power comes from her, like, the kind of the, for lack of a better term, the pureness of her heart in wanting to be a Jedi. She wants to protect others and she wants to face down evil. And that really does make her into the last Jedi, even as the Jedi as a force have gone away and the bloodlines are running out. But she's there and she's not connected to the story in any way. And it's so great. It's so refreshing. She can be a hero. Anybody can be a hero. And I love where the story leaves off, setting up Kylo and Rey for this powerful confrontation where they're now kind of the big heads of each movement. Kylo's the supreme leader, and now he's in control, and he gets to make all the choices. And Rey is, not necessarily the leader of the Resistance, but she is one of the leaders, and she kind of gets to call the shots for what the new Jedi get to look like. And there's this really great set of dynamics that are set up for the sequel, and I was super pumped for that. Problem is, they never made a sequel to that movie. All right, The Rise of Skywalker, and this is largely why I had to talk about this being a judgment-free zone. I will admit, completely here, I did not like The Rise of Skywalker. I found it to be a very frustrating experience leaving the theater. Sitting in the theater, I literally got mad at the movie several times and left a very frustrated person. And I don't say all this to say that if you like The Rise of Skywalker, you're wrong. No, that's not it at all. I talked about this with my wife. She really liked The Rise of Skywalker when we left, as we were leaving the theater when we were talking about it. And you know what? I'm really happy that she liked The Rise of Skywalker because, once again, if somebody gets to experience the fun, happiness that I get from Star Wars, that's a good thing. So don't let what I say affect how you view this experience. I say all these things from a place of love about Star Wars. Like, I love Star Wars, and even Rise of Skywalker, it's a Star Wars movie, and I will still watch it as part of my rotation of watching Star Wars movies. It will still get in there. I'm not going to skip it or anything like that. I watch them all the prequels, and all the originals and all the sequels. I will watch them all. And being someone who likes the prequels more than most, I understand what it's like for someone to not like the Star Wars movie that you like and to be very vocal about it. And I know how much that sucks. So I don't want to try to be like mean-spirited in what I'm saying about The Rise of Skywalker. I'm trying to be really thoughtful with any sort of critique that I throw its way. Because I think it can take it. It's just a movie. But I don't want this to be some sort of CinemaSins-esque, haha, here's a nitpick on the movie, ding, this movie's bad, ding. No, that's not what we're going to do. I want to talk about actual substantive things when it comes to movies, and not to just talk about the surface level observations. There will be a few moments where I get a little close, but it's kind of in search of a greater narrative, and I've actually written down a lot of notes about what I want to say about this movie. But let me talk about the things I really liked about The Rise of Skywalker, because there were a lot of moments that I really did enjoy about the movie quite a bit. The first thing, I love the incredible chemistry between all the actors. Like, it's so fun watching them go on this grand adventure together. And this is a fun movie. My takeaway thought from Rise of Skywalker is, if you turn your brain off, this is a really fun movie. It's just, I don't like to turn my brain off to enjoy movies, but for this you kind of have to, unfortunately. But the chemistry between all the heroes is great. It's just like seeing them on this adventure together is really great. For as much as I love The Last Jedi, I am a little bummed that it's split up all the main characters, because they just work together so well, and they clearly have a lot of fun together. And so to get them to be on this adventure together is a really, really great time when they're all just having a fun time together that we get to share in. Anthony Daniels as C-3PO is hilarious in this movie. He has really excellent comedic timing, and just his little like body shuffle movements and just the timing of his lines is just, it's perfect. It's really, really funny. He does a really great job in this movie. Babu Frick. If I have to explain why Babu Frick is great, you clearly haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker, which, what are you doing listening to this? Go watch The Rise of Skywalker. It's a Star Wars movie. Go watch it. But Babu Frick is amazing. And this movie, like The Force Awakens, is really visually stunning again. Like J.J. Abrams, for all of his faults as a storyteller, which he does have some significant faults as a storyteller, he is really good with CGI-heavy movies. He knows how to use CGI and how to get the best like look out of it, and how to craft these really energetic sequences. He's excellent at that. From a technical perspective, this movie is excellent. Well, there are some things here and there that are that are less than excellent, but I'm not talking about those right now. But the interplay between like Rey and Kylo is fun. It's really interesting to see this connection as like their Force dyad is what they're called in the movie, and it's really neat to see a new aspect of the Force that's never been touched on before. So it's fun to see the interplay between those two and how they're having to sort of square off with each other and knowing that the other, like, they want to reconcile with each other. You can tell, but they have vastly different ideas about how to do that. And I think that really should have been the core of the movie entirely, and it doesn't ever quite hit that. But the parts where they do start to hit that tension between what each of them wants for each other is where the movie is really good. It's a lot of fun to see them interact with each other and like explore the dynamics of their Force relationship. When you look at like how does the hero of the Resistance reconcile this connection that she has with the Supreme Leader of the First Order, that is a really interesting, dramatic question that you can go in a lot of really interesting, dramatic directions with. And that really should have been the core of this movie. And it's unfortunate that it wasn't. But we'll talk about that later. The conversation between Ben Solo and Han Solo is really great. This is kind of the closest the movie gets to continuing to build on the foundations of the previous two movies. And that's where The Rise of Skywalker is at its best, is when it's building on the foundations of just the previous two movies. Rise of Skywalker has a really bad habit of trying to wrap up 9 movies at once, which is a horrendously terrible idea that was never intended to be the end goal to start with. So I don't know why they decided to do it, but they did. But this movie is really good when it's just sort of building on The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. And that's just sad when it's not, because it's not a lot. And let's talk about a lot of the bad things. And I say this from a place of love. Like, it hurts me it physically hurts me to talk about the things I really don't like in the Star Wars movie. And I'm kind of roughly going in chronological order / what I can think of to talk about. But let's talk about some of the bad. Palpatine being back doesn't make sense. Like, Palpatine is this grand schemer who has never shied away from like making his presence known. So for him to just sort of be hiding out in the wings, like he's a grand planner and like reveals himself when it's necessary, but like really, like, he's working through, so he waits until after the first, and I'm sorry, I need to recollect myself here. Like, you look at the grand narrative. I don't want to be nitpicky with this, but you look at the grand narrative of these movies where I can buy the Empire kind of going into hiding after Palpatine's death, quote unquote death, in Episode 6. And coming back kind of stronger than ever and like slightly different from what it used to be, but still fundamentally the same sort of evil force that it was. But I can't buy the Emperor hiding out, just hanging out and regrowing some strength, but never making himself known. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it really undercuts Episode 6 entirely. Like, we get the grand shot of basically Palpatine blowing up in the Death Star and then the Death Star exploding. And then with Episode 9, we go, nah, that's not actually, that didn't fix the problem. They didn't defeat the big bad. So now the big bad's back, for reasons. And this movie was so set on having a big bad when it didn't need one. It had one with Kylo Ren. Like, he was so set up to make these interesting decisions. And you could tell they were wanting to do the Kylo Ren redemption arc, which is fine. I know a lot of people weren't huge fans on that, but I think it does provide some interesting dramatic questions that you can explore. And I don't think that was a bad thing at all. So I think the redemption arc is fine. And I think you can have a really interesting tension between this character having to be the supreme leader of this evil force and sort of getting redeemed, and then having to reconcile with all the bad actions he's done, and where does he go from there? And there's some really interesting story questions that you could have explored with that, but that they ultimately chose not to explore because they just made Palpatine the ultimate big bad, which gives Kylo an out and just sort of undercuts all the interesting buildup that they had with his character. And overall, like, The Rise of Skywalker is just a really thoughtless movie. And here's where I'm going to get the closest to nitpicking that I want to get. I, once again, do not want to nitpick as a whole. I'm nitpicking here to make a greater point about this movie, and that it's just thoughtless. There's a point in the movie where there's some stormtroopers with jetpacks that are flying around, and the line is, "They fly now." And yeah, in universe, stormtroopers have flown lots. Like in the original Rebellion, there are plenty of like jetpack stormtroopers. Granted, they're in more of the extended universe type things, but they're there. We've seen jetpacks in the movies before. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the bad guys might use some jetpacks. And it's just like they didn't bother to do any homework with kind of the lore. And I understand like the movies are going to have to trump the lore at some point, and that's fine. But it doesn't make sense in universe for the characters to be surprised by a jetpack when we as the audience have seen jetpacks before. The Mandalorian was coming out around the same time, and the Mandalorians have jetpacks. Why is this a surprise that there are suddenly some bad guys who might have jetpacks? And so it's just like they just didn't think that part through. Another thoughtless aspect is the dagger, the Sith dagger that they use to locate the Sith wayfinder that they use to go to where Palpatine is at, which is three whole levels of contrivances there, which is really frustrating. But they have to match up the exact cutout of the dagger. They have to line that up with wreckage of the Death Star to point in the general direction of where the Sith Wayfinder is at. It's just, why would you bother doing that? Like, and the pieces of the Death Star are in like this big ocean, so it's like, well, I hope that those pieces don't like erode over time or move at all, because then that dagger is going to be useless. And it's so weird because the dagger has an inscription in like Sith runes that says it's that the vault is on the Death Star, and it's like, what? Why didn't you just change the story a little bit to just have the inscription say exactly where the Wayfinder is going to be at, rather than it telling what thing the Wayfinder is on, and then the Wayfinder has to line up, or the dagger has to line up with the wreckage? Like, why bother doing that? That's just like a whole level of silliness. And another the last thing I'll say about the thoughtlessness of this movie, Palpatine's plan. So Palpatine's plan, okay, so he tells Kylo Ren, go kill Rey, knowing that Kylo Ren's not actually going to kill Rey. He's going to try to capture her. He's going to tell her her heritage, that she's related to Palpatine. And when she hears that, she's going to decide to come to Palpatine to then take his role. That's apparently what he wanted from the beginning, was to do exactly that, and to go about the most stupidest way to do that. And that is just really like, it's so thoughtless. Like, okay, fine. You want Palpatine as the bad guy? Fine. Have Palpatine as the bad guy. I don't think that's a good choice at all. But have Palpatine as the bad guy. But at least give him something sensical to do. Like, for all of it, like, Palpatine gets careless in Episode 6, and that carelessness ends up getting him killed. And he apparently doesn't learn from that at all. in episode 9, where he just continues to be careless and to have dumb plans. And rather than like waiting until he's got his enemy pretty much already in his snare, exactly where he wants him, he opens up this entire opportunity to come take out his fleet that he's built before it has a chance to really even get off the ground. Which, like, why don't you wait until you're in position on every. And I realize I'm bringing in real life logic here, but I know you can have problems with the logic of any kind of given movie. You can sort of logic yourself out of certain things, but like there's suspension of disbelief, right? Like you can forget, okay, like, yeah, okay. The Last Jedi opens up with the First Order basically seizing control of lots of planets. That I can accept as, okay, they were hiding out and now all of a sudden they're coming out in force and just quickly taking power. Okay, sure. That works. It doesn't work so much with Palpatine. Okay, so he's been hiding out with these fully armed ships that also are like fully manned as well, and he's waiting. He doesn't wait until after they're deployed to take control. He takes control before then, and then tries to get his plan into motion. Like, it's just, why wouldn't he wait? Oh my gosh, I don't get it. I really don't. It's very silly. Um, and from a story point, Rey has to kill Palpatine, but she can't kill Palpatine the first go around because that's bad, apparently, to kill the bad guy unprompted. It has to be in self-defense, which doesn't make any sense because Rey has been like killing stormtroopers and other bad guys kind of without provocation in some ways. But if she kills Palpatine without quote unquote provocation, even though he's the biggest bad guy who has been responsible for all the pain and death and whatnot, she's not allowed to kill him until he attacks her first. Like, it doesn't, it's nonsensical, and that's what's so frustrating about this movie. Like, this movie is deeply, deeply frustrating because it doesn't make any sense. It didn't bother to think through its own consequences, or maybe it did, and there's a bunch of studio meddling. I don't know, but man, there was a lot of just dumb things that happened in this movie that you take a couple seconds to think about it, and it just doesn't work. And I want to talk about the main thing that I really dislike about this movie. I hate Rey Palpatine more than anything. I hate it. It's such a terrible decision. It actively walks back the emotional crux of the previous movie, which is really frustrating. I know a lot of people had frustrations about The Last Jedi and feeling like it undid a lot of what The Force Awakens did, which I heavily disagree with. I think J.J. Abrams obviously set up a lot of characters and stuff, and Rian Johnson took them in different directions that maybe J.J. Abrams wasn't going to do. And that's a totally valid thing to do as a writer. You can set something up, but the next writer doesn't necessarily have to follow it through the exact way you intentioned it. If you wanted to do that thing, you should have done that thing. And so it's really frustrating to see J.J. Abrams actively walk back a crucial plot point to The Last Jedi. And what's worse is they didn't even have the strength of their own convictions to follow that through in making Rey a Palpatine. She's not even a direct descendant. And this is, granted, this is part of more the extended universe lore. It's not addressed specifically in the movie. In the movie, we're kind of led to believe that she's a direct descendant in that it was Palpatine's son, and that she's Palpatine's son's daughter, Palpatine's granddaughter. But in their extended lore now, they walked that back. It's not Palpatine's son. It's a failed clone of Palpatine. And it's the daughter of a failed clone. And it's like, well, there's even less of a connection now. Why would you even bother to do that if they're not actually like connected? Like, it's like the moment from Spaceballs.
Before you die, there is something you should know about us, Lone Star.
What?
I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate.
What's that make us?
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. That's what it makes us. Like, oh my goodness, what did I did? I don't understand why they did that. I really I really don't. But that's the last I'm going to say about The Rise of Skywalker. It's a deeply frustrating movie. If you're trying to actively engage with it, and unfortunately, it's a Star Wars movie that you can't do that, which is I think pretty sad. I think you should be able to interact with every Star Wars movies, even the prequels. The prequels are their own levels of bad, but you can at least engage with them on some level. Like George Lucas clearly doesn't know how humans interact with each other, but he does plant some not wrong or not uninteresting ideas about how democracies kind of change and how they can be eroded and undercut. And it's kind of fascinating. Like Episode 3 has some genuinely good moments that are kind of revolve around that. But the other two prequels do have their own moments as well, and they're not all bad, and they have their own aspects that you can engage with. But Rise of Skywalker doesn't really have that as much. Like there are small moments here and there that I do enjoy, like I mentioned earlier. But overall, this is a movie that you have to really just turn off your brain switch and just sort of enjoy the colorful ride that you're going on. And it is a very colorful ride. It's very enjoyable. It is fun. It's fun to watch all these people do their things and have their lightsaber battles and use the Force and watch the ships blow up and have a grand old Star Warsy time. And that the Rise of Skywalker is a celebration of Star Wars, but it's rather than like the Last Jedi, like I mentioned, being a celebration of what Star Wars can be and what it means to people. The Rise of Skywalker is a celebration of what Star Wars was. And it's unfortunate that it seems to be that the future of Star Wars is going to only be remembering how great Star Wars was, and rather than thinking about how good it can be. And I don't know. Maybe with The Mandalorian, we'll continue to see unexplored aspects of the Star Wars galaxy being explored in different ways. Maybe that will eventually come into the movies as well, and we'll get to have new Star Wars adventures that aren't just kind of retreads of the original movies, but rather brand new experiences entirely. I hope we do. It doesn't seem like Disney's too keen on making movies right now, with all the COVID shutting down movie theaters and whatnot. And that's not funny. I don't mean to laugh to say that's funny, but just sort of recognizing the situation for what it is and just realizing that it sort of sucks. Movies are going to be going away for a little bit. They won't stay away. Movies make way too much money to actually stay away, but for the foreseeable future, we're probably not going to get any major cinematic experiences in the Star Wars universe. Reportedly, that it's in a little bit of brand rehab at Disney right now, and I think they're still trying to figure out what they want to do with that universe, and I think we'll get a good glimpse at that with the upcoming season of the second season of The Mandalorian. But I don't know what that means for the movies. I hope they see a lot of the critical response to The Rise of Skywalker, and I hope they recognize that they can't just sit on their laurels, that they rest on their laurels, that they can move forward and try new things. They've knocked it out of the park with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They can do that for Star Wars. I know they can, but it's just a matter of whether they're going to be willing to do that or not. That was a lot. I know it was. That's I don't really like to leave on that note with talking about the things I didn't like about Rise of Skywalker. So I'll say this again. I love Star Wars. I will still watch The Rise of Skywalker proudly, and I know what it's like when people don't like your Star Wars movie. So like, I am still going to say, hey, go watch Rise of Skywalker. It's still a grand old time. It's still a lovely time. But that's really all the thoughts I have for this episode of HitPoint. I've been Andrew Jeffries. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Facebook.com/I think the HitPoint Show or HitPoint Show. It's all the links to our socials are in the description. Go check those out. Thank you so much for listening. Keep an eye on your health bar. HitPoint is made possible by our generous patrons, E-Man and Doug Jeffries. Thank you so much for your support.